Good afternoon. We are delighted this afternoon to have a school board and county board joint budget work session. And as members of the public may notice, we did not travel, the school board did not travel to the county board office today. The county board came to us, which is a rare and delightful event. And we are so pleased to host you today. I recall that you've been in this space in the not too distant past when there was a flood in your space.
We're okay now.
Happily, you are not here because of a flood. You're just here because of the kindness of holding this work session within an entire day of school board work sessions. So we began at 9 o'clock this morning and went till 12:15. And now we are here with you for a couple of hours. And then we've got one more after this. So thank you all for being here. I understand you have a late night tonight. And we are sympathetic on that front. I'm Bethany Zacher-Sutton, chair of the school board. I am pleased to launch this joint work session with a few notes. School board member Zariah Tapia Hadley will not be able to join us this afternoon. She is traveling with a last-minute personal commitment and sends her regrets, shared with me some of her thoughts, and perhaps I will be able to incorporate those as we go along this afternoon. The board does not hear public comment during work sessions. However, there are numerous opportunities for community engagement. Community members may speak during public comment at our upcoming regular board meetings. They may share their feedback in writing to school.board@apsva.us. I am certain that the county board is equally accessible through public comment and email. School board meetings and work sessions are live streamed, and the recordings are posted on the website after the meetings. And so we will begin by making the rounds of introducing ourselves. I think I will turn to my right, and we'll go around the room this way.
Good afternoon and welcome to everyone here on APS. Superintendent Francisco Duran.
You did that on purpose. Miranda Turner, School Board Vice Chair.
Kathleen Clark, School Board Member.
Maureen Coffey, Vice Chair of the Arlington County Board.
Takis Karantanis, I'm Maureen Coffey's colleague. I have a practical question, Madam Chair. How do we signal to you or to our chair here that we want to speak? Okay. Fine.
Yes, I think the traditional turning of the tent card is an excellent way to go this afternoon.
Hi, Michelle Cowan in the County Manager's Office.
Mark Schwartz, County Manager.
Matt DeFranti, this year's chair of the county board.
Julius J.D. Spain, Senior, Member, Arlington County Board.
Susan Cunningham, County Board Member.
Monique Bryant, School Board Member.
Thank you. With that, I would turn it over to Chair DeFranti for any remarks he would like to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll send it nearly directly to Mr. Schwartz. The only thing that, because you all have a long day, I particularly thought it was good to share. I've discovered that I need the discipline of this 3-minute timer, and our board sometimes can benefit too, and hopefully that will help us, and I've shared one with you, Madam Chair, and so with that, we will do a presentation of the county budget, and I know that there's pieces to that. And Mr. Schwartz, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the County Board and School Board. Very happy to be here, and a special hello to Dr. Duran. We talk very often. So we are going to go through a presentation that's about 25 slides long, and we'll cover a pretty broad range of material, and I know that you'll have a lot of questions for us. So I have to also use the clicker here, so I should be able to time this correctly. Okay, so this is supposed to be a work session on the fiscal 27 budget, but I figured we'd start on fiscal 26 because right now we are in the middle of a fiscal year where I'm pretty uncomfortable with the way things are going. We ended our fiscal 25 budget for the first time in recent history where expenses pretty much equaled revenues, dead on which is a bad place to be. We try to be conservative and end the year with a little bit of revenue. Those trends that drove what happened in fiscal 25 are continuing into fiscal 26. So as of right now, we're heading to the end of March. We have projections on how we're going to do in comparison to what was adopted by the county board, and which includes funding for the schools. We project as of today that we'll be short around $5.5 million from our revenue projections. And since schools also share in those revenues, the impact on schools is somewhere close to about $4.8 million. What I've done on my side is slow down hiring. We haven't stopped it. And we've been very careful to limit our discretionary spending. And, you know, the thing about that, I think we'll work our way through it by the end of the year. We'll have to figure out how it is we're going to fill that hole. But those trends are something that we expect to continue and will continue into fiscal 27 and probably beyond. So with that background, which is very important background about what I was thinking about and doing, wanted to get into a little bit of an update for you all about what's going on with our tax base and what's going on more broadly in the economy. Now, this slide shows a number of trends. It's the same slide I used back on February 21st, and the theme I talked about back then was uncertainty. The only change, which is a fairly obvious one, is the war going on in Iran, since we presented that on the 21st, which we anticipate will have some pretty direct effects on the costs of living. And so that hadn't really been reflected in some of the things we had prepared about a month ago. And the two things on this slide that caused me mainly concern back then on the revenue side were the impacts we've seen on our hotels. We've seen hotel stays drop and impact on some of our discretionary tax sources. And also things that we've seen an increase in unemployment, which I know has affected schools too, because we've seen some of our parents of school kids and also some of our residents who had jobs have lost them in the current federal administration, which is 14 months into that. It seems only like 14 years. Let's go on to the next slide. This is I wanted to spend a little time on this because we have been operating, I've been working in the county for 20 years as an employee of the county government, and I know a lot of you have been in our community for a long time, but the world in which we are living has changed a lot. And the impact that has had on our local tax base is something that I wanted to spend a few minutes on. So, if you go back to the year 2000, which was actually the last year there was not a formal revenue sharing arrangement between the county and schools, we had, as a county, we were able to get 13% of our general fund revenues from the states and feds. So fast forward to where we are in 2027 fiscal year, we're at half of that. 7% of our revenue now comes from the states and feds combined, and the percentage of that that's from the states is really the main piece of that. Feds, it's a very small percentage. We have additional material to back that up if you want to go into that in greater detail. In the year 2000, we also had a very different kind of economy where we were relying to a greater percentage on our commercial real estate market. And we're in the end of 2025, we have a 23.5% vacancy rate in our commercial office market space. And that is just something that we have been dealing with pretty regularly over the last 4 or 5 years, and was really exacerbated by COVID and some of the changes we've seen in the way the economy is being put back together after COVID, with different elements focused a little bit more on remote work. And again, that has been reflected a little bit, in, actually a fair amount, in what we've been seeing in some of our revenue sources. So let me go to the next slide. And this has a lot of information on it. So rather than have you squint, I'll just tell you that the last year where we saw significant increases in commercial assessments, by significant, I mean 5% or greater, was 2014. Okay, so that's 13 budget years ago. So there has been a significant change in the way the real estate sector has been put together and how it funds the services that we rely on in the county. And that can be shown pretty clearly on this slide. This is a slide that I used about a week and a half ago when I was at Advanced Arlington, talking a little bit about, if you go back to 2009, the chatter back then, and I remember it well, was that about 54% of our real estate assessment base was from residential and the balance was from commercial. That was true, but if you disaggregate our commercial residential real estate base, it's made up of two components. The purely commercial as an office space, and then the multifamily residential, which we split out there. You can see that our community has changed fairly significantly over the last 15, 16, 17 years. You see that the part of our economy that is driven by purely commercial office space is now down to 17%. And if you add places where people live, whether it's single-family homes, multifamily residential, that is now making up almost 3/4 of our real estate assessment base. So that is a challenge for us. What you're seeing there is an amplification of what I talked a little bit earlier, which is just a change generally in the way our economy is working. So this slide, which is pretty busy, talks a little bit about the revenue trends for our revenues that are sensitive to consumer demand, sales tax, meals tax, and hotel tax. There's a lot of information on here, but let me just tell you what this means when you boil it down to it, if you follow the lines there, and I think the FY26 line is the green line. If you look over at the hotel taxes, you can't quite see it, but we are right now, as of this month, estimating that we will be $5 million short of what was passed in the fiscal 26 budget when it came to an assumption on hotel revenues. And again, that's $5 million short, and that's something that's shared between the county and schools. We're $3 million short on an adjusted basis of where we thought we would be with meals tax. We did raise the meals tax by 1%, but when we made sure to adjust that. So things that are economically sensitive, we had a shutdown that went for a month or 5 or 6 weeks. People don't have as much discretionary income, and we're seeing that show up in our revenue sources. So one thing you probably, have heard something about is how are we trying to address this generational change in our economy. The county board has spent a lot of time and effort, especially over the last year and a half or 2 years, talking about making it easier for landlords that have commercial space to convert that and adapt it to be reused as residential space. We've seen a lot of progress on that, and that is something that I think you will start to see the vacancy rates start to come down because we're moving things from the denominator of one fraction over to another fraction, and so hopefully that'll be better. And also, we have not given up on focusing on business attraction and working closely with our bids and partnerships. But as with everybody in the region, it's been difficult for us. We do not have, as I like to say, the best kind of parent in some ways is a data center because they don't have kids that they send to school and they pay all sorts of revenue. Now they have horrible environmental impacts, but I'm just talking purely from a fiscal impact. We don't have that advantage, which I think is our colleagues in Loudoun and Prince William have for the moment. So again, a little bit of 101 here. These are our sources of taxes. There is on this list of taxes nothing new. These tax sources have been around for many decades, and we have often talked about the need for the Commonwealth to take a look at diversifying tax resources that might allow us to tap into some of the true economic activity that goes on in the county. But for right now, our main source is the real estate property tax. So I have one more slide before I turn it over to Michelle. And this is the slide where I feel like I've been called before the tribunal. I'm the guy who decided to propose a budget without sharing a tax rate increase with schools. Now, as the superintendent knows, that's not because I have anything against schools. Schools is our #1 expenditure. And I will say this as long as I need to. When we are out talking to prospective economic tenants coming into the county, the first thing I always mention is our phenomenal schools. And I have 2 daughters that benefited from that, so I believe firmly in the schools. But what we were faced with was a budget gap which is not unprecedented, but which was significant, where we saw cuts that were really affecting us from the federal government that I think, fortunately, you have not had to deal with yet. And we also I had the obligation to meet obligations that the board had entered into with collective bargaining agreements for public safety. So with that, I was put in the position of having to propose service reductions and make some hard choices. I don't know if any of you have heard about gymnastics. Make some hard choices about what's happening. So it does not give me happiness, but in the relative balance of things, that's where I landed. And I'm going to have Michelle go a little bit more into what was actually included in the budget.
Great. Good afternoon. Can you all hear? I feel like I can't hear myself. Sorry about that. So the county board provided guidance to us back in fall with direction on how the manager should propose or develop his proposed budget. Three primary. Is there another?
I got it. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll do it for you.
I cannot multitask. That is clear. Advance slides and talk at the same time. Well, it was a lengthy document with a lot of great instruction. Three primary things that were in that guidance. First and foremost, prioritize reductions that do not disproportionately burden our vulnerable community members. And you'll see later in the slide, I'm going to talk a lot about what's happening with those parts of our community that are really struggling and have since COVID, and with the economic environment that we're in that Mark just laid out. Second, to propose reductions that significantly reduce the proposed budget gap. And then finally, fully fund our collective bargaining agreements and any losses in federal funding. Next slide. And so Mark, I think, just walked through his recommendation for not sharing the tax rate increase with schools. This slide just gives you a little bit of history where the tax rate has been increased three times and not fully followed the revenue sharing principles. Back in 2018, when we split between WMATA and APS. In 2020, where schools retained a higher amount, and then where it was shared proportionally in FY25. Those were the three times that the tax rate increase has been raised. Next slide, please. So now I'll get into more details of the actual proposed budget that the board is considering right now and having many, many work sessions on. First of all, the proposed tax rate increase of 1.5 cents, these are the things that it covers, and in line with the guidance that I just described to you. Loss of federal funding. We so far have experienced $3.3 million in hard cash losses from the feds. The first is for our SNAP program, which, as you know, is one of the primary food assistance programs funded by the feds. We are losing, because of the changes that USDA made, $1.9 million in 27. That will grow to $2.4 million in 28 and not recoverable. I'm going to spend more time talking about SNAP just because there's other changes that are going on that are really, really impactful for food security. Keeping on the food theme, we also lost funding for our senior meal programs. We run congregate meal programs at a couple different community centers that were subsidized by USDA. We've lost that funding. That is included here. The second other bucket beyond food is in security. We have lost $1 million in what we call urban area security initiative funding. May not sound important, but as you can imagine, given our location in the DMV, we received a disproportionate amount of that funding for the federal government to get ready for terrorist attacks and other things like that. We lost that money, and we need to keep that in order to keep the community safe and keep our regional partnerships going. And then we lost money for cybersecurity, which we all know we share that as a risk. The second big bucket was funding about $800,000 for a new flexible assistance fund for people who are not able to secure sustainable housing. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then finally, $10.6 million for our public safety collective bargaining agreements. Next slide, please. This just gives you an overview of what's included in the manager's proposed budget for workforce investment. Those collective bargaining agreements for fire, police, and then what we call service labor and trades. So our trades workers who are out there working hard during the snowstorm and doing all of our water main repairs. For fire, the average increase is 10.7%, and police is an average increase of 11.4%. For service labor and trades, it's 3.5%. Now, for the rest of our workforce, it is a 3% merit increase with a slight range movement, no cost of living increase. On the health insurance side, we have continued, and that's been one of the drivers for both our 26 and 27, and we're worried about 28 as well, budget pressures. We are just seeing significant increases in costs because of very difficult cases, as well as just rising medical costs. That means we've proposed a 10% increase for employees and their premiums. That builds off of 2 prior years of 7% increases, so that eats into those proposals. The third leg then of beyond of what Mark described, how we balance this proposed budget, there are $10.6 million in proposed reductions, which includes 56 position reductions, 24 of which were filled, 17 were vacant, and then 14 were frozen, but just to give you a sense of that. There's a lot on the slide, and I'm happy to walk you through any area in particular, but I think what I'd like you to take away is there was not a single department, including the county board office, that did not take a reduction in this year's budget. And what's as important to point out is what we proposed to be reduced versus what we didn't. Human Services is our single largest department in the county. It 800 employees, $700 million. We only reduced $1 million from that budget, and it was in efficiencies because of the guidance we got to help those support those supports in place. As Mark mentioned, though, some of the other major cuts that were very difficult to propose and I know are having impacts on our community, Parks and Rec. We love our Parks and Recs program across all ages. $2.3 million there for gymnastics, maintenance, and other position cuts. The proposed elimination of charity, or closure of Charity Library at $500,000. Under fire, the possibility of consolidating a rescue unit. And then there are just a bunch of other cuts, across the board. Now, I would note that this builds on, as I know schools has gone through this too, a whole series of reductions that have been made over the past several years. So in last year, 13 million, 36 FTEs, a lot on art, a lot on, when I say art, not on public art, on art transit services. We closed a small preschool. We took actions to reduce eviction prevention. We spent a lot of discussion on technology, right-sizing, efficiencies. In 2025, it was almost 10 million of reductions, 34 FTEs, same sort of thing. In 24, 5.5 million, 20 FTEs. And what I would say about all this, and most of these were, I hit some of the highlights, transit, technology, eviction prevention, but the rest of those cuts were spread across the organization, and they're beginning to cut into, core services and how we're performing. And I think when we go through these conversations internally with our leadership team and with the board, there are so many things that we can't stop doing. We have a legal obligation to provide public health services. We must provide safe drinking water. We have regulatory requirements for both stormwater, for the water pollution control plant, also for drinking water. We have requirements in how we serve our developmentally disabled community. We can't not meet those without, serious impacts on our community, but legal and regulatory risk at all as well. And so I think this multi-year consistency of cuts, we've tried to prioritize efficiencies, get rid of where there might be excess. It's beginning to get a lot closer, especially when we know what we have to do, what we're obligated to do as a local government. Now, the next few slides are just talking about other things that we are seeing as service pressures and that we're very concerned about that we're not able to fully fund, and want to walk you through some of those. So homelessness, I just wanted to know, it is very much increasing in Arlington. You can see on that table at right, which doesn't even include this year's numbers, which we don't have yet, that from 171 up to 271 homeless in the county. And what's really interesting about that, we are seeing a direct increase in single adults experiencing homeless by 8%, and then families increasing homeless by 20%. The other thing with homelessness that we're really seeing too, more seniors and more developmentally disabled are experiencing homelessness, and how we help them is very different. When you have a senior who presents that is homeless, they often have medical issues, right? It is not just you can put them in a shelter. They need specialized space with specialized care, and they don't have, anywhere to go. So we are working on longer-term capacity increases in our homeless services center space so that we have a dedicated space for those seniors where they can go and hopefully find transitional housing in the long run. So that is homelessness. Keeping on the housing theme, I don't know if you all are familiar with this program. Housing Grants is one of the single biggest programs in the county, and what it does is it provides monthly housing assistance for 3 groups of people, or 3 groups of residents. 1, working families, 2, seniors and disabled, common theme. That program serves around 1,700 employees, and you can see on this chart that it went from, and this is only 4 years of data, almost 1,500 folks to 1,750 in this current year. The way that numbers, and just to give you a sense of who that is, about 45% of those people that participate in that program are seniors. Their average income is around $19,000. The second group is disabled adults, and that also is, well, it's about another 500 households. They only make $19,000 a year. And then finally, the average income. The working families is another 500 households, and their average income or max is around $39,000. So they really need this assistance to stay housed in Arlington. The program has been growing exponentially, and we are mindful that it is an entitlement program, meaning if you meet the criteria, you receive the benefit. 15 years ago, it was about a $7 million program. Now it's about a $20 million program. And what we're finding is our goal for those facing housing challenges is sustainability, to find a place where they can stay for the long run. So what we've done, we're implementing a wait list because of the financial constraints on this program, but we're also implementing a new fund, what we're calling targeted prevention and flexible assistance. What we find, DHS does like individual by names, they know these clients. And if they have a client who all they need is help with a down payment, a security deposit, or first month's rent, or transportation, where they can be housed with kin or family somewhere, they can do that, which they can't do under this program. But that is our intent, to help as we go through this period of great innovation and experimentation to deal with this problem. That is a new proposal to help address that need. AHIF, I think you all know what that is. That is our primary program. Putting aside how we give direct assistance every day or every month to our residents, we need more affordable housing supply. That is our way to do that. We have not been able to fund it at the full need for the last few years, and that could be a need for anywhere from 10 to 15 million annually. And that's not just for new housing supply, but it won't surprise you that our affordable housing developments are aging and need substantial reinvestment. Food security, I think you guys know what's going on there. AFAX visits just this past year have increased by 7%. That's just more demand. The second issue is CPI is going up. Food just costs more. And third, SNAP. We have almost 10,000 clients, and with the new Trump administration requirements, there are new work requirements that are substantially impacting their eligibility. They have reduced the dependent exception age from 18 to 14-year-olds. They're excluding a whole bunch of non-residents. It is really just on the food security front, kind of a triple whammy, right? Other areas, so behavioral health, I think this is one where we have put a ton of resources in, and I'm really happy with the outcomes. We know that our overdoses are down significantly. I think the profile of mental health in our community is getting better, but there's always more that needs to be done. But we've tackled this, and in collaboration with you all, in so many great ways. We finally have our emergency services. If you call, it's staffed. It wasn't that way for a while. We have the Crisis Intervention Center, which you guys know is right down here, but it is 24/7 alternative to going to the ER. There's no place worse for someone in mental health crisis to be than in the ER, handcuffed to a bed. And so this provides a great alternative to that. It took us 3 years to set up, but it's finally working. We have our mobile outreach support team, so we have these amazing people you should meet who are in the community every single day, meeting people in mental health crisis where they are, and then helping them get to CIC or helping them get to emergency services. We have that staffed weekdays from 8 to 8. We're looking at options to expand, but it's one of our most successful programs, and it also keeps them from getting involved with the police, which is another big deal. And then school-based mental health, I think, yay, all of us together in this room. This is something I worked really hard on a few years ago with DHS and with Julie and her team. We now have mental health counselors in 7 middle schools and high schools. We saw 120 kids this year. It is such a great program, so I think we should all really celebrate what's happening there. Aging and disability services, just so you know, our community is getting older. Our over 65 cohort from the last 10 years, has grown by almost 50%. And as I kind of hit on, the aging rent, they just have more service needs, and there are more of them here, whether it's homelessness, whether trying to find affordable long-term care, food insecurity, social isolation, all those things. And then developmentally disabled adults. We've done a good job, I think, of standing up some new programs, but, I was talking to Kim about this. We know we have gaps for those 18 to 22-year-olds. Like, where do they go, right? So more day programs, but then also more residential programs are really needed when families can't take care of their young adults or middle-aged adults or close to senior adults who need care. So that is a need that we're trying to work on, but requires operating and capital investments. Those Human services is where we've been focused most on our needs. I want to spend just a little bit of time on some of the other areas that we know are important to the community. Transportation, we have this wonderful transit strategic plan that would allow us to expand more outbus routes. We're not able to do that, but that is a priority, important for the environment as well as important for economic development. Of course, we're all focused on environment and climate. We just kicked off our climate action plan. We're looking forward to collaboration with you all on that. Facilities, I think we're in the same boat here. This is one we share. In the county, we have 90 facilities. The average age is 44 years old. There's a lot to do. And I think for us, what is particularly difficult is we have so many specialized facilities. We have a detention that are 24/7, a detention center, the 911 call center, our group homes, the homeless services center. Those facilities are used 24/7, and they require such specialized infrastructure and technology, right? And as that technology ages, the fire alarm systems, the locks in the detention center, they all require ongoing reinvestment. Public safety and judicial, we have been really struggling because of the staffing levels in police and fire to get our overtime down, but just even to have the functional amount of staffing on the streets because of our recruitment issues, and that is what the collective bargaining agreements helped us address. We have frozen positions that we've used in the past to balance the budget, and getting them unfrozen will help us get to more full staffing and reduce overtime. And then we have a request from some of our constitutionals that the board is considering. Finally, we are, and I think you all are facing the same, we are facing in 27, this has not been fully budgeted yet, a significant increase in our electricity rate increase, significant. For the county, $3 million. And so we're trying to work with the region and Dominion to work that issue through. Child care and youth services, more affordable child care slots, out of school time programming. We can talk about that more if you have more questions, but we have really great new programs that are in place that are largely funded with one-time money, but can continue through 27. Parks and libraries, especially our libraries collections, we're not meeting inflation and not meeting demand. Mark talked a little bit about what we need on planning and economic development to get that commercial office vacancy rate down. We also have issues with our community where expanded code enforcement is needed. And then collective bargaining and internal services, everything that we do and the support for it is getting harder and more complex, and so resources needed there. The last slide is one that you all have seen before. I think we're also proud of the collaboration we have. You provide the county and the community support. We do the same. This is our typical pencil where we show, the 11 to 12 million of support we provide for schools, whether it's maintaining your school bus fleet, whether it's school health nurses, whether it's doing crossing guards, whether it's our collaboration on transportation, all of those things. So I think I covered a lot in a little bit of time, but hopefully that was helpful, and I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Cowan and Mr. Schwartz, and directly over to you all for questions. I think for this segment, we have through 2:30, and I'm also mindful that it's plausible, though you've had a very long day already, and we are getting ready to have a very long evening. If we have to go further into part 3, we can organically work that. But first, over to you, Madam Chair, and all school board colleagues for questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz and Ms. Cowan. I have some questions, but I'll turn to my colleagues first to see who would like to jump in. No. Sorry? I'll hold. You're going to hold. Okay. So shall I jump in? Okay. This is unprecedented, I think.
Shy.
I think that I wanted to jump back to slide 4, I believe. Yes, slide 4, which I think means I'm putting Mr. Schwartz on the spot here. I just am curious if you could speak a little bit, maybe in a little more detail, about areas where you have particular strategies to try to sort of mitigate the uncertainty or the trends that you would prefer were headed in a different direction.
All right, so I did spend some time talking about what we're doing with commercial office vacancy. The other areas on hotel trends, I'll say we've spent a lot of time working with the General Assembly to try to have some more tools brought to the county, including a tourism improvement district, and basically additional taxes on people who are staying in hotel rooms to try to bolster the kind of advertising and things we need to do there. And for some of the other areas on housing, to be honest with you, we have on affordable housing, there was a lot of discussion about this in one of our work sessions. The additional tools I'm bringing there, I don't have a lot. It requires a lot of money. There's discussion in the General Assembly about loosening up some of the zoning requirements. At the end of the day, it's just going to require a lot of money to add to our housing stock. And the other things like unemployment and the consumer price index, I actually don't have any control over those, unfortunately.
I mean, I think it's worth just naming what everybody knows for our public, that we did set aside $11.5 million in last year's budget. And then colleagues can jump in, but our hotel, 4 years ago, I was badgering Mr. Schwartz to prognosticate that our hotels would come back post-COVID, and they eventually did. But, I would argue that we have to be conservative on the budgeting side with respect to hotels, but I also am confident that over the 3, 4, 5-year horizon, hotels will come back also. So I don't know if that helps.
I do think we have some data to indicate that a large portion of our decrease in tourism is related to international tourism, and we can all perhaps understand why our international friends may not be so interested in visiting the United States or DC in particular at the moment.
Thank you, Vice Chair Coffey, and I see Takis, and I want to get to your questions, but go ahead, Takis.
So, central to the strategies of making the pie bigger is focusing on what is our most important economic asset, and this is talent. So schools plays a very big role in that. Not only because as an educational organization you contribute to that, but also because typically a high-performing school system correlates with a high-performing type of households that support the students. So one of the critical areas where there is a field of collaboration here, and I think that it should become less tactical and more strategic and long-term, is how we work our collaboration on higher education, community college work, etc. So how we enmesh with these, because these are strategies that help us, sustain and grow a sector here. One of the growing sectors is actually higher education. We've become more of a college town than we used to be. We have more R&D now in Arlington than we used to have. So we are more interesting for this kind of activity here. And this is something we pursue, with targeted investments here. That's one thing that I wanted to add to your horizon of thinking, because a lot of these newcomers that are not so many anymore are looking at the quality of APS.
Thank you, Takis. Mr. Carantonis, back to you guys for questions. You all, excuse me.
I did want to say I share your pain on energy costs. We are waiting to see where we land with that. Ms. Cowan, you gave a figure. I think you said of $3 million in your estimated potential.
Yeah, that's based off, and I think this is another area of regional collaboration, but then also with schools. We all participate, and you all have a representative we call VEPCA, which is the Virginia something. Yeah, power. No, but it is the group of local governments and school systems that together try to negotiate better wholesale rates with Dominion. And we got this bad news in March or February that the tariff rate was really high. I think there's a meeting right after spring break, so hopefully we'll all know more. But
yes, we are waiting. We are waiting also, and stressing a little bit about that one.
Yep.
I think the other area where I had a question I wondered if you could just expand a little bit about, and I didn't write down which slide it was, so forgive me for one moment. You were talking about the sort of legal and I think it was like regulatory obligations, and I think that was around, I lost track of where you were.
Yeah, I was talking, that was when I was sort of going over the history of the reductions that we've made. And I didn't have anything written on these slides. And so, I mean, we can, maybe not right now, but I could walk you through every department, if you will, and what they have to do and what they'd have to do. So like DHS, we must provide animal control. We have to. It's a state obligation. We must provide public health. You know what I mean? Like those things. Yeah.
I guess I was curious, sort of, what are the biggest buckets of those?
There's a ton in DHS. Unless we come in DES, there are tons of, when I say DES, those are our departments, environmental services. So stormwater, much of that is legally required. Water and sewer services, we have permits. We have to have clean drinking water, and then we have regulatory requirements through feds and state for the Water Pollution Control Plan and our sanitary sewer system. We have obligations via the Congressional Compact for our contribution to Metro, both Metro Rail and Metro Bus, as well as Metro Access, which is one of the paratransit systems for those that are developmentally, disabled. CPHD, there are minimum code requirements that we have to meet. So you have to provide permitting services. You also have to have a zoning function in the county per state code. So that's a flavor of that. Now, of course, we're not required to do anything in parks, but we would not be the community that we would be without parks, right? So that's just, if that helps, on examples.
It does, and I'm curious if you know off the top of your head, if you're looking at your budget as a whole, what's the sort of percentage of, or have you not sort of broken it out in that manner?
We haven't calculated that quite in that way, like the percent. So, but we're working on that. We got that question from Ms. Coffey, and so how we describe that. But go ahead.
Yeah, and I would add, Maureen asked the question sort of in the federal sector. You have something called non-defense discretionary and sort of things that are discretionary. And I'm going to have to be very careful. I'm not going to answer your question about what I consider to be discretionary, but if I said, for example, that local governments, as a rule, do not need to be in the business of providing travel gymnastics program or competitive gymnastics program, I would get a lot of pushback from a large number of people who might be showing up at the county boardroom tonight. But as far as statutory obligations, I think that, again, we can run through each of the departments. I will say, for example, we've been getting a lot of pushback because our historic preservation program, which frankly only has 3 people in it, okay? There's a vacancy there that we're not going to fill. We have the obligation to process applications that come into us for historic designation, and so we'll do that. But our community expects more than that, but that's an example of something where we pare it down. And I can't give you a number. I could say probably, I don't believe this at all, but our Parks and Recreation and Libraries programs, there's very little in the Code of Virginia that requires us to provide the services. There are, I think, some for libraries that we have to provide certain level of services, but there's no requirement for that, and that would be an example. So I'm hard-pressed to put a number on it, but it's a great question, and I'm going to do whatever I can to avoid answering it.
I understand, and I appreciate that Arlingtonians have expectations, as you just indicated. And we are Arlingtonians ourselves, and we have expectations, right? Anything else from my colleagues? Yes, Ms. Clark.
I think more an observation. Going through these slides again, there's a lot of areas where we have overlap in the work that we are doing and the services that we are providing. After school, Ms. Coffey and I are serving as liaisons to the pre-K working group right now, looking at childcare, but also pre-K offerings for youth here in APS. I want to you brought up gymnastics, and I know this is a hot topic in parent groups. one of the gymnastics programs is one of the two that provides adapted gymnastics for students with disabilities. So I'm curious, when we think about pulling that lever to potentially cut a program due to cost, and that is one of two adapted programs for students with disabilities to attend, do you have enough folks in therapeutic rec to be able to handle those one-off, helping to support those students with disabilities in typical classes?
Right. So I know that you probably found better ways to spend your time than to listen to all the work sessions with the county board. We spent a lot of time discussing the gymnastics program, and specifically for our therapeutic recreation program. We are not proposing to eliminate that adaptive reuse part of the program. That program pre-existed the program we have at Barcroft, and we've committed, and as we were very explicit about this, that we'll maintain that with our therapeutic recreation staff. Those are the people that are not affected by the cuts to the gymnastics coaching. And I know that there's been a little bit of confusion about that, but I wanted to set that clear. But I think your broader point about if we're providing adaptive reuse programs for parks, we do that. And I know that schools also has programs that are addressing some of those same people who are, whether they have physical challenges.
And I see Board Member Spain. I will say that in that work session, my questions were right on that bullet because it said comparable moving. But as you know, and all of you know, comparable services in the area of differing physical and intellectual abilities is a big term that is not always the same. And so all of us on the board were asking specifically about that piece in addition to the commitment to keep the services. So that context I hope is helpful, that we were right on. That was our first question as we were thinking about this whole topic. Mr. Spain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I was actually going to kind of sit idly by and just let things go by today, but I do want to make a comment because School Board Member Clark, you said something just now that kind of triggered a thought I've been having for a while, right? And you stated overlapping services. I'm just going to be honest. I think there are perhaps a number of programs, not just within county structure, but also in APS that are redundant. Again, this is not the place to kind of hash that out. But I think in the future, especially when we think about youth programming across the board and services that are being rendered for the whole of the community, where is there overlap? And I think we need to take a hard look perhaps in the future, not just when programs like gymnastics, but other community type engaging endeavors. I will also point out, I think Board Member Cunningham and I are at least from the board side, the county board side, we love Arlington Public Schools. All of our kids went to schools, and we all ran for office lifting up the schools that they're very prized. But we're in some very tough times in asking for us to do some significant trade-offs. If you go back to slide 8, and I think this is a tell-all, not just in this particular area, what the county manager talked about, the hotel tax, the $5 million shortfall that we're going to have, but just in that particular area, we're seeing that all over the place, right? So I think at the end of the day, for me, it's about how do we find a level of compromise and work together in a very equitable way, understanding that all of us here on the county board supports the school system, right? So again, just thank you for this opportunity, Ms. Clark. I just want to lift up what you stated about redundancy and duplicity here. I think there's a lot of it, okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Spain. I see Vice Chair Coffey.
Yeah, I do just want to caution, though, that just because there are similar things going on, it doesn't always mean that they are the same things. And I think early childhood is a perfect example of that, right, where we have licensing expertise. We administer the child care subsidy program. That is a block grant passed through from the state. We do all of the inspections and those kinds of things. We are not ourselves educators, and so and you all are not inspectors, and so I don't. There's a synergy there, and it's important that we all stay in communication. But it's not like either side of that balance could stop doing what they're doing, or easily, frankly, transfer those services to the other side of the line. Because if you asked us to actually do the administration of childcare centers, I don't know that we have anyone employed by the county that could teach all of the little children. And I don't know that you all have people who are going to go through every facility and know what the fire code is and how the infants have to be evacuated from buildings during a fire. So I just want to caution us a little bit that sometimes things that feel overlapping are more complementary and supportive of each other rather than duplicative and redundant with each other. And that doesn't mean that all things are that, but I think we need to be very careful and intentional and detail-oriented as we think through what those things are.
And I want to comment, I agree with that. And I think we've had good examples of what you just described with the work Michelle talked about with Dr. Crawford and the mental health. And so how we've worked together to see some areas where there was overlap and where there were areas where there was expertise, resources that the county had and then that we needed and vice versa. I think we have a great model there. And it's a constant, how that happened is constant collaboration, communication, coming together. The preschool working group that you're on is an example of trying to understand that and differentiate. What are those distinct differences? But where are there some areas that we can potentially find some collaborative ways to move forward? To your point, Madam our chair of the school board has shared with me next year a working group that the school board is interested in putting together is about youth after school programming, where we would do the similar discussion where we go deeper into understanding where are after school opportunities that we have, where are some that you have, and then I think even some of our nonprofits and other organizations, I know that you all have put forth budgets in that area. So that communication, Mr. Spain, I think is really critical for us to have. We have good examples and models of it. I think we should do more of it because when we've done it, we've benefited our constituents, whether it was parents, families, or students. And I guess, again, not to be a broken horse, but the mental health one was the best example that I can see, where I remember when a couple of years ago, we had not had that conversation. And there was a lot of good things happening on both ends. But now when our students and our parents are actually able to get those mental health services in those schools, it's a more direct impact for them. And ultimately, I know all of us around the table, whatever role we're serving, we're here to make a difference for our community. We're here to make a difference for our parents and our students, and that's a prime example. So, and there may be other topics. I think, again, today's more around the budget, but I do think moving forward, and I'll certainly work with Mr. Schwartz, thinking about what are those other topics that we can bring together county and school staff to find a way, to Maureen's point, what is distinct, but then also where are there some overlapping places that potentially could be resources allocation that would be a benefit, or in my opinion, more of the service benefit to the parent or the staff member or the family member or the community member.
Well, and it seems to me that we should all be mindful of gaps, and because if we are providing programs within schools and you are providing programs within the county and we are still missing folks, we should be figuring that out. And I know that shifts. Who those people are can shift. But we should always be trying to collaborate around making sure that we're filling those gaps. And I know when we did the food security work in 23, that was very much focused on who is falling through the cracks here and not accessing services or not being able to access affordable food. And, so that those continued efforts, I think, are really important.
We want to give you, and mindful, but I do see Ms. Cunningham wanted to add.
Yeah.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
I very much appreciate the question, and Ms. Clark and I got to be on JFAC together last year, which was great. I think for our whole community, all the work that we each do is a community asset, and particularly when we get into CIP, we talk about the physical assets. And for all of us, we should be looking at, whole child, whole community, return on investment, great outcomes, and making sure each dollar we spend gets the best outcome. And I think that this is a time on the youth side, we've got the youth and child well-being plan that is kicked off. And the idea of that is to kind of go cradle to early adulthood and look at where are the gaps, who is missing, what programs might be missing, are we doing things efficiently, could we do it differently? And I think that's a place to really, really partner. And this is probably offline outside of budget, but I'd love to hear how it's going and whether we need more board involvement for either or both of us to make sure that that gets us a year from now to a really solid plan that we can then use to inform budget going forward, because that's an important opportunity. And I don't know if we'll get this far, but in our other work sessions throughout the budget process, I've talked about, could we do a youth budget, essentially, right? And I think Fairfax did a really good job of this long ago, of saying, like, we want to spend on youth in the most efficient way, and if we put $1 in the 2-year-old, then it's, $5 saved in the 7th grader, right? And so that's one piece. And then the other is, our demographics as a community are shifting very drastically, and with our 65 plus growing kind of 2x essentially. And so that's both challenge and opportunity. And I know you guys have done great work on getting volunteer programs up and running, but I think we can think together about meeting those needs of the elders at the same time that we're tapping that talent into our youth. And that's in schools, but it's also in after school and throughout. So it's a very important and very cool place to spend time in the coming year.
Thank you. And I think with that, we will shift gears we will have the passing of the clicker. It's the ceremonial passing of the clicker. And of course, we can come back into the county presentation as needed, but we will switch gears, and the superintendent and I are going to work our way through the APS presentation.
All right. Wait till that comes up. All right, thank you. As Chair Zachary Sutton said, I will begin the presentation just giving an overview of my proposed budget. Still the status of my proposed budget. This Thursday, the school board will adopt a proposed budget, but it is very similar to mine at this point, with a lot of discussion that's been had so far. But that will be this Thursday. So as I developed the budget this year, the school board did provide me direction, really thinking about how do we maintain and support our staff, high quality workforce. We know that right now it's a very challenging time to try and recruit and retain teachers, and that was a primary focus that you'll see in our budget. There was also a request to make sure that anything in our budget is aligned to our strategic plan. We spent a lot of great work on that, and that we do not just have across-the-board cuts, that they would really prioritize where those cuts and reductions might be, so that they were as furthest away from our students in the classroom as possible, and making sure that anything that took place for a reduction, we understood the impact on students and how we could potentially find an operational way to do that. Finally, there was also a direction that's been in place the last couple of years, but more intentionally, it was done last year and this year, was to use our reserves responsibly. And actually, they were a range of a percentage to set forth that we weren't using reserves like we had been using previously for ongoing expenses. So with that in mind, we built the budget with compensation increases first, and we have collective bargaining as was described as you do. We were able to, I'm thankful that we were able to come to agreements with all of our collective bargaining units prior. This is the first budget since I've been here and since collective bargaining has been in place where we've actually agreed to the actual increases prior to the budget being developed and being presented. In past years, it was after the fact. So I'm very pleased with that. We also then focused on any new budget requests, very limiting those to just what were the essential programs and services that we needed. Any of the efficiencies that were considered, again, were furthest away from schools, limiting the use of reserves. And with a very challenging budget year, what could we do to try and reach all of those things? We were able to, fortunately, you'll see, reach all of those with a lot of unfunded needs that you'll see a slide forward. And I'll talk a little bit in a slide coming forward how we were able to do that despite the fact that we received much less revenue. So the budget was about a 1.3% increase over last year. Just for context, the fiscal year 26 and the 27 budget together was a 3.61% increase over that 2-year period, while at the same time we saw inflation increase 5.4% over those 2 years. So we were able to, in the last 2 years, adopt a budget that was 1.79% lower, and that does have implications because of all of the various costs that go into it, as well as our collective bargaining agreements, which often are brought to the table with an inflationary perspective from our unions. Again, here's just a highlight of our strategic plan where we focused all of our work, but again, of these performance objectives, it was really a student-centered workforce, which was our staff compensation in this particular budget, that is the driving additional costs that you will see. We do have one small additional increase with regards to student growth and academic success that I'll talk about in a moment. So this slide just breaks down for you what are our collective bargaining agreements that we were able to come into, and our board did adopt two of these, are licensed for teachers and our administrators. The support has not yet been adopted by the board, but there was an agreement on this portion of the compensation. So you can see it looks a little different by each bargaining unit, but by and large, overall, what it amounts to is a 4.45% average across the bargaining units, and which is a total increase of $26.1 million needed for all of our collective bargaining agreements for next year. That 4.45% is a combination of a COLA, which varies depending on the bargaining unit, and then a step increase. In our school board policy, there is the direction to me to always have the step increase every year in the budget. Any agreement beyond that is what we go into with our collective bargaining units on what the cost of living adjustment may be. The compensation history here I think is important because if you recall a few years ago, we were in the bottom of the quartile of all of surrounding jurisdictions, and we're now in the top 3, depending on the category that we're in. So I'm really proud of that work. I know it took a lot of difficult choices, and also there was a moment in time when we knew intentionally that we were relying on our reserves, but we knew we'd have to get back off of that, and we've done that the last couple of years, last year for sure, and this year you'll see as well there's a very, very modest use of reserves, and that may not continue once the final budget is put forth. We are looking at how we could still potentially reduce the reserve use for non-ongoing costs. So how did all this happen? How do we balance the budget? I think this slide is probably the one that's most important because it tells specifically what did we do and how were we able to come to a spot in a very difficult situation to get those things met. So you can see on the top left corner of the revenue that was coming into us was about $7.4 million of new revenue. That's counting any new federal. Actually, at this point, we're only anticipating about $159,000 decrease from the federal. We know that there may be a lot more. We actually it could be up to $3 million. But at this point, right now, we know that it's about $159,000 less. The state revenue right here, this is based on Governor Youngkin's proposed budget. We do know that the General Assembly has a current budget that they are debating from the House and the Senate, House of Delegates and the Senate. That'll provide us potentially $2 to $3 million more, depending on what their final decision is. But this particular amount, I always have to do the proposed budget based on the governor's proposed budget. And this was the Governor Youngkin's proposed budget in December of $2.5 million more. We know the additional county transfer that's been shared with us, and then some additional local revenue that we received through fees and whatnot. So that was $7.4 million is the only additional revenue that we had to work with. Yet, if you look on the column right, the box right next to it on the right, we had compensation, as I just shared, of $26 million. Our health insurance premiums increasing $6 million. Some baseline adjustments, which were primarily inflationary and costs that are needed to increase, $1.8 million. The opening of the Grace Hopper Center, $1.1 million. And then one particular additional investment, you may be aware that we have worked on a couple years ago, our planning factors. We had a planning factor study where we determined what were the needs planning factors for the public who's listening are the formula we use to determine how many teachers and what types of teachers are provided to staffing for each of our schools based on the student population that they serve. These planning factors through this study were identified that for particularly our English learners and our students with disabilities, they were provided through a formula that had not changed since the 1990s. And this was a formula at that time that was established in a very different model for how we would provide services to our students. If you many of you recall, as the students tease me all the time, I used to teach in the 1900s. So when I taught in the 1900s, that's what they tell me when I go visit schools. When I taught in the 1900s, at that time, students with disabilities were taught primarily in a non-inclusive manner. They were taught primarily self-contained and not provided access to general education at the level that we do now. That has been the primary driver of our planning factor change. So when we did the planning factor study, the planning factor study showed us that we were about over $30 million needed to increase our planning factors. Obviously, we knew we could not do that. Last year, we began with phase one, where we provided at our elementary schools, 7 of our elementary schools, additional special education teachers. Those schools were identified based on their SOL test results in reading and math for students with disabilities. This year, we're going into phase 2. At this rate, it's probably going to be phase 10 or 11 and 12. We'll see how we get. But we're in phase 2 at this point for secondary schools. And we have 4 middle schools and 1 high school that we also looked at their ability to provide inclusion in their classrooms. That's $892,000. So with that in mind, you have a $35.2 million new budget needs and only $7.4 million revenue. Then you can see right there what our gap was if you subtract 35 from 7. That was our gap. So how did we do that? How did we close that gap? Well, on the bottom left, you'll see that we did some central office reductions, continued to reduce some positions there in the amount of $2.3 million. One thing for us that you may all be well aware of is our enrollment is not continuing to increase. It's actually flatlining, and it actually was less this year than we had projected. So that allowed for a $3 million reduction in our budget. We had some prior one-time costs that we could offset. And then a major piece, you'll see that $15 million, was this year for our VRS contribution, which was based upon their investments in the stock market. VRS did not require us to provide more funding. They actually allowed us to provide less funding. And that particular thing was a huge driver in how we were able to get to that $24 million. Through those reductions, you add them up there, that meant we received $24 million in reductions. We were still short about $3.6 million, and that is the amount we are currently using reserves for to close the budget based upon, again, Governor Youngkin's proposed budget. So the additional revenue we got was $7.4 million. We used reserves. This amount of reserves of 3.6 are ongoing costs. There are other reserves that are used in this budget, but those are truly one-time costs that aren't accounted for here. And then you can see, as I just indicated, the $24.2 million of reductions. That was how I was able to present a balanced budget without having a gap for this year. Again, for the public that's listening, I want to be very clear. It's primarily driven by central office reductions, enrollment reductions, and our VRS change in our contributions that were needed there. With that in mind, we were only able to, as you see on the new budget items, address compensation, health insurance, some other baseline adjustments that were needed, as well as a very, very minimal increase to our planning factors. In our central office reductions, here's a 3-year overview. We have reduced our central office positions and/or funding for those offices by $33.2 million, or 66.5 positions. I know that that's not something that any of us are proud of to say we're cutting positions, but we also had to make sure that we had our efficiencies in a way that was as furthest away as possible from our classrooms, from our students. So this does not mean that we just discontinued some of the services. It's more of a challenge to provide them, but it has been our goal over the last couple of years to try our best not to reduce positions at the school level. Other things we've done over the last 3 years, you can see that we've adjusted our teacher planning factors for art, music, and physical education in fiscal year 25. That saved us 20.4 positions. In fiscal year 26, we eliminated exemplary projects. We changed our ITC contracts. We capped the amount of tests for AP students that we paid for. We also did an optimization study through Baker Tilly Consultant, where we right-sized more of the positions that we gave to schools based on the enrollment and closest to the class size. That warranted us 66.25 positions. And then this year, the only thing we did this year was the adjustments based on enrollment. And I've already indicated that, which was about $3 million, but that's a reduction of 28.4 positions that we were able to account for. With all of that in mind, we still have a lot of unfunded needs that we could not cover. Just like Michelle was sharing, you have many unfunded needs in the county side. We do as well. The unfunded needs, this is just a snapshot of some of them. There are others that were identified through working groups of principals, central office groups, to identify what some of these unfunded needs are. You can see here for our student academic growth and success, a major one is we have 10 schools that have been federally identified for school improvement where we are going to need to provide additional resources for them. All 10 of them are based on students with disabilities, every one of them, and 2 or 3 are because of also English learners. Those are the reasons they've been federally identified, no other reason. With that in mind, we have a long list of items that we think would be helpful and that are going to be necessary. Our school board and our recent committee of the whole did talk about some of those resources and positions, and we are working to see how we might be able to, with any additional funding that comes forth from Governor Spanberger's budget that she signs, potentially, it won't be all, but potentially address some of them. We also know that there is a need, a great need, to ensure that we're providing the proper supports for our students with disabilities, and also making sure that we are thinking about the continuum of services that we provide. That's primarily in the student academic growth and success. In the student well-being area, we do want to see how we can reduce some barriers for students, provide more safety supports, and those are some of the items listed there. In the operational excellence, while we did the planning factors for mostly instructional reasons, we did not do the planning factor study for our custodial services, and we have seen a need there for us to revisit that to determine the amount of square footage that's associated with their work that they do. So that's what's noted there. And then we had some school budget requests and also the potential loss of federal funding of up to $3 million that we did not account for in this. We only accounted for $159,000. And with that, no, not yet to your section. So you can see here now breaking down the budget by numbers. You can see this chart, I think, is a really powerful visual to understand the amount of additional revenue year over year that we have received. This is the additional revenue that we receive from the county and the Commonwealth. The increase in revenue to APS from these two sources represents the lowest level in recent memory. This year is the lowest level in recent memory. Compared to the prior year, the additional state transfer, again, based on Governor Youngkin's proposed budget, is down 79.9%. And should we receive an additional $2 or $3 million from the Spanberger administration, it would still be a considerable reduction. And based on the county transfer, it was down 87.1%. And so this is just a reflection of also the challenges that we have faced on our end in terms of those needs that were not able to be yet met. This here breaks down where our funds come from. 76% comes from the county transfer overall. Last year was 76.6%, so it's down slightly. Federal aid for us is only at 2.7%, and that's why while people do see a concern and discuss federal funding, for us as the overall district, federal funding is not a key driver as it is for some school systems, but what it is for some of our schools and some of our populations. So our Title I schools, our students with disabilities, the ability to provide those specialized services through Medicaid that we provide through therapists and whatnot. Those would have a very direct impact on those students. And yes, while it's only 2.7% of our total budget, for those populations and those schools, that's a huge impact to having losses of, again, up to potentially $3 million. And then you can see the state is about 15% of our budget, and then there are some other reserves, 2.3, et cetera. This next slide I want to illustrate because it has been something that we've talked about. I know we've talked about it at this joint work session in years past, and you can see on this slide how we have greatly reduced our use of reserves for ongoing funding and ongoing positions. So this year we can see we have done a significant, this declined 47.2% since fiscal year 25 in terms of the use of our reserves for those ongoing expenses. So I'm very proud of that. And this helps us to make sure that our budget remains in a space and a place that's sustainable moving forward. This year, again, we have a limited number. The $3.6 million is something that we put in based on Governor Youngkin's proposed budget versus what's being discussed now. perhaps that will be reduced in future discussions when the board makes their final budget in May. For the federal government revenue, I know it's not part of our operating budget, but I want you to be aware it's about $23.4 million. It is for Medicaid, food and nutrition services, Title I. We all know what Title I is for our schools of poverty. It also is for Title II, which is our professional development services for our teacher, Title III, which is for our English learners, and then Title IV for his student supports after school. So again, what we are projecting is that there may be up to $3 million loss in this particular category, and in the budget that is proposed, we're only accounting for $160,000 at this time. All right, here's the timeline. Right now, the General Assembly did closed session without coming to a budget, but they will be coming back on April 23rd. Right now, there's a key discussion going on between the Senate and the House. You may be aware over the tax on data centers that the Senate wants to reduce and that the House does not. And so that's the key point that's going on right now. But when we look at the House budget versus the state budget, you will see that in a moment and when Ms. Zucker-Sutton talks about the APS fiscal impact. Our hope that there will be some determination at the April 23rd session, and so that the board can make the final approval on May 14th. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Zucker-Sutton for the fiscal impact.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. He didn't even stand up to hand me the,
Right next to
So I wanted to speak a little bit just about the environment that we find ourselves in, and this is something obviously that we talk about all the time and talk about year over year, and particularly I think since the JLARC report was released about state funding in 2023, that gave us an interesting lens through which to think about the funding of public education in Virginia, broadly speaking. We know that we are significantly underfunded in the state. But I will say that having heard the county manager's budget presentation on February 20th, our thinking, or at least my thinking, was somewhat, I'll describe it as accelerated and enhanced in thinking about our fiscal environment, and it caused me and my colleagues to think a little bit more about some of the contexts within which we're operating. And so I wanted to just go through a couple of areas and talk about them briefly. And this is a lot of this is just food for thought, honestly, for all of us. Even my own colleagues and I are still sort of unpacking some of our own thinking about where things sit for us in these areas. So as Dr. Durand has described, Governor Youngkin's budget was a $2.57 million investment for us. We are hopeful that we might get the House figure of 2.95. We don't know. We also are thinking a lot about, well, what's coming in the future? In the county's budget presentation, there was an area of I think it was, I can't remember how it was described, but it's sort of mitigating factors that APS has this year, and it was the potential for increased state revenue. And of course, the increased state revenue is not anywhere near what any of us would like, and not near what we received from the state last year or in multiple other past years. So what we do know is that there is a joint subcommittee on elementary and secondary education funding that has been established that's going to review the JLARC report. I think that process is going to get a little confused because we are now talking about 2022 state funding from the JLARC report. So there's going to have to be some updating in the current context, I think, that will need to happen in that process. But I think the bottom line is that we really do not anticipate that there's going to be any significant change in the funding formula at the state level until FY28 at the earliest. And it would be surprising. It would be surprising to me if we see any significant impact in state revenue before FY29. That That would be my estimation. And I don't know how significantly, change will come. Whoops, did I just go twice? Okay. We talk about a lot about our LCI, and for the benefit of those who outside the room who might not know fully what this means, the state sets the local composite index as the amount that the locality can take that the state believes the locality can take responsibility for, I guess is how I would describe it, in terms of funding. And in the region, we share the joy of having the highest rate, along with Alexandria and Falls Church, and I think the joy is really felt by the county of having the responsibility for 80%, so to speak. And Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William all fall below that threshold. I thought I had a moment of, again, enhanced thinking on this topic, and recognizing that we have a pie chart that says that 76% of our funding this year is coming from the county, not 80%. And so I thought, well, this is interesting, and I wonder what it looks like in our neighboring jurisdictions. And so we simply pulled those numbers. And I truly don't offer that as anything more than food for thought. And there are probably all kinds of characteristics of those counties and how they do things, and we could unpack it somewhat endlessly. But it is interesting to me that Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William all are receiving higher percentages of their school systems operating budgets from their locality, and so it is a something that perhaps we want to unpack further over time. In terms of the year-over-year between the county budget and the APS budget, this was something that had come up in recent conversations, and so I asked staff to take a quick look at it. And interestingly, you can see that our budgets do fluctuate, and they fluctuate at different rates from each other. And also, we seem to be more or less on track with each other over the years. And again, I offer this as just a food for thought kind of thing, and not necessarily anything conclusive in this particular moment. But we might take time over the coming months to think about whether there's implications, or to unpack it a little further. I also wanted to talk about per pupil growth, and our cost per pupil. This is something that comes up pretty regularly in community conversations. We hear it from you all. We hear it from folks out there in our world and in the county, broadly speaking. And one of the things that I want to share is that while we have the highest per pupil cost in the region, and we have historically had the highest per pupil cost in the region, as you can see, the percent of increase is growing much more significantly in our surrounding jurisdictions, and Arlington is in fact not growing our per pupil cost at nearly the same kind of rate. Now, county manager, you're frowning at that as though.
I have some indigestion.
Oh, I see. In addition, I thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about what contributes to our per pupil cost, because, of course, we know that there are things that are unique to Arlington that can contribute, and one of those is class size. And so we put together this table that does demonstrate that the 5-year average the 5-year average class size demonstrates Arlington at the lower end in both middle and high school in terms of our class sizes, and somewhat on par with other jurisdictions at the elementary level. But we know that obviously a lower class size is going to contribute to a higher per pupil cost. And so when we're thinking about that high per pupil cost, we're thinking about what are some of the factors that go into that. We also took a quick dive into the cost per pupil average in different levels of the system. And here, what it demonstrates really is that we have some special programs, and we know we have these special programs, and we know that they cost us more than our traditional elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And so that is also a contributing factor to having the per pupil cost that we have. And then finally, you have a slide with a pencil on it, which I really admire, that shows things that the county has in supporting the schools. We were thinking along the same lines and thinking about some of the things that we have. And we did not attach dollar figures on these, although we have the dollar figures on them. I think your total was about 11-12 million, and I think ours was in the 7-8 million or so range for these programs that we provide that are benefiting the community beyond simply the APS student population. And so I think, yes, that's it. So we can go to questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So open the floor to colleagues if you have questions. I often find, like you, Ms. Secker-Sutton, that I'm on the hook for the first question to get folks to reveal my limits of my intellect, and then let other people jump in. I'll just start with 3 thank yous. And I hope I'm mindful of Virginia law that it is not ours. We are partners, and therefore, to your comments, Dr. Duran, we're best when we really integrate and are communicating deeply on individual topics. And I'm thinking in COVID, every week at 9 p.m., I had a call with the school board chair. We have not made every week because it's not COVID, and also because I now have a 6-month-old today, in addition to a 2-year-old. But that collaboration is always best. But there's also Virginia law that we have to humility in us having opinions on what is essential, what you spend, because we're not educators. Thank you on the $5 million in savings that you identified last year to align class sizes with teachers. I know that's not easy from personal experience. When I was teaching, I watched a colleague need to go to a different school because the enrollment at my school where I taught was low. So big thank you. I don't know if it ended up precisely at $5 million, but it's a huge, not easy decision that you all took last year. Thank you on the reserves. I think it is absolutely appropriate that you're proud of that shift, and it takes work for sure. And then thank you on this, on driving towards the schools versus central office. That is not an easy thing either, and I'm grateful to the entire central office team. You may, if you don't have anyone and it's just you that is an office, that is a big challenge. The question is actually, and I'm really glad to get the presentation slide. There's 2 slides. There's slide 17 of what you presented, which your deputy, I don't know, that Mr. Hawkins sort of looked at me as I asked this question beforehand. This is actually the reserves being used for ongoing, not the total reserves.
Correct.
But it is relevant to the one topic that we didn't talk about on slide 2 of our presentation, which is the question. This is not deeply socialized this fiscal year soft revenues. Slide 2 of our presentation talks about, sure, 5.5 million on our side and 4.8 million on our side. This is some of the fears that we on the county board had a year ago. We have reserves that we put in place, but I'm wondering a little bit from the school side, if you all have sufficient reserves so that you could address that 4.8 million, keeping in mind that, just being concrete, the revenue share is the elephant in the room, right? And so that would be one time, and we have a balance, we can't, but do you have reserves such that you could cover that 4.8 million on the school side?
So thank you for the question. Currently, we just had a third quarter report that was given to the school board. This year is going to be very close. It's going to be tight, just like it was for the county last year. But we do have sufficient reserves right now, we believe, that to handle any shortfall that may occur.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the whole answer because fiscal conservatism is a must. You can't bounce a check during a year. And so that's the concern that you raised, Mr. Schwartz. So that's helpful context for me. I probably will want to follow up as we go forward on that because there has to be enough such that you can address that. And that is not a silver bullet answer to the ongoing shared challenge we have. But that's my question.
Well, and I would just offer the comment that we have in our unfunded needs the $3 million that we would like to put into reserves to hold for the potential of federal losses. So it's all a little bit of a game back and forth of where the money is sitting or is not sitting.
That's super helpful. I'm mindful that my timer is definitely up. Vice Chair Coffey.
Could I ask a clarifying question before
go ahead.
we move
Sure.
on? And make sure I'm tracking too, because it is still new information as things are in the budget world. When we talk about gaps, you're talking about the 4.8 million in revenue gap, and your third quarter would be talking about expenditures and sort of versus budget. Just to clarify, you have reserves to cover both of, should there be a gap on the expenditure side in addition to the 4.8?
So when we give the third quarter report, we compare what we think our anticipated revenues are going to be compared to our anticipated expenditures. And while we are closer this year than I think we've been in a very, very long time. I feel like we'll have enough. We are projecting right now that we're going to have enough funds to be able to end up in the black, even though we're going to lose, I think, $3 or $4 million from the county, whatever it comes out to be. But let's just assume that we're wrong, and I'm wrong. We have sufficient revenues, I'm sure, sufficient reserves to be able to handle anything else that's coming out there.
Great, thank you. I just want to make sure I was tracking.
Yeah, that's super helpful, I guess, because I believe it's been a long time since I carried my school budget book, but I believe that there is some budget book page or graph that has this.
Yes.
Probably it's a good idea, if you can, for someone to just send that over to the county board so we have that information.
Mr. Hawkins will send that over.
Great. Vice Chair Coffey.
Thank you. You all really need to be close to your microphones in this room, apparently. I think the unifying theme of both presentations is none of us have enough money to do what we would like to be doing. And I think recognizing that reality is really important on both sides, because I think there are so many community priorities, of which education is a massive one, housing is a massive one, health and human services, massive. And we are all doing our best to do more with less. There are literally this year in the county budget fewer dollars than last year, and each individual dollar goes less far because of inflation, and everything we do costs more to do next year than it did this year. And so I think all of us just kind of voicing that and frankly accounting to our community, right, in these different slides and different formats, saying we all agree we would love to do these things. The reality is that's not going to happen in this budget because there literally are not the dollars to do it. And, I've had numerous conversations amongst our board and in work sessions at this point on the role of the General Assembly, frankly. I think in most years we are more than happy to help share with the rest of the Commonwealth and provide them a lot of our tax revenue. And in this particular period of time, we really do need them to wake up and understand that Arlington may have been stable and well off for many, many years now, but we are being uniquely and deeply impacted by what is happening across the river. Even when you look at some of our neighboring jurisdictions' revenue, they may not be growing in the way that everyone would like to, data centers aside, but they are still growing. And that is frankly the biggest difference right now. And so I think there's a very important conversation to be had with our members, with the General Assembly more broadly, because it's not enough, right, to get our 5 people that represent Arlington County to care about this. And which is bringing me to a question, I promise. On slide 22, you share a little bit about what the state funding picture could or might look like. I'm a little unclear based on the presentation. Are you accounting for either the 2.5 or the 5-ish in the proposed budget, or not at all?
We're accounting for the 2.5 in the budget.
Okay, gotcha. So there's approximately another squishy 2.5 theoretically.
Like 6 or 2.9 additional potentially, yeah.
Okay, got it. That's helpful for us to understand, because I think it's a much bigger risk, obviously, if you're accounting for the whole 5.5 and then we don't get there. But that makes me feel a little bit better. And then I think the other slide I wanted to go to is slide 24, because I think it is really interesting, and I think that this is like a really important part of our shared learning here. I will flag that the numbers under the Arlington County side are inclusive of the transfer to APS, and so if you exclude the transfer to APS in fiscal 27, we are down by 0.4%. 2026, we were at 3.0 increase. 2025, 7.1 increase. 2024, 3.2 increase. 2023, 6.0 increase, for a total on the county side of only 18.8 increase over the same period of time. And I think that is also important to note, because the fact that we are down this year by 0.4% is inclusive of the unshared tax rate increase. And we are at a much more negative number than we would anticipate, knowing again that every dollar doesn't go as far as it did before, and there are fewer dollars, only after accounting for the unshared tax rate increase. And I do wonder, I don't think we have those numbers, but how much even more drastic it would be if we were planning to share that. Like, I think that to me is a really important driving difference here. And as we can see, that is also the only negative number on either side of this table in the recent history. And I don't actually know the last time there was a year-over-year negative budget for the county. So I just want to clarify some of those numbers, because I think it's important that if we're comparing apples to apples and it's the APS budget versus just the county budget, we're taking the APS budget out of the county side of that budget.
Okay, thank you. I mean, certainly any questions from or comments for sure from school side, we'll just continue on and we can come back to it if you don't have them yet.
I would just make one quick comment. Going back to Ms. Coffey, just the sort of that we would love to do these things because we all are feeling that. I thought it was interesting in one of the county slides about the budget direction and wanting to preserve support for the most vulnerable communities, because our budget reflects the same thing in unmet needs. Our core, the most critical unmet needs that we have are essentially related to students with disabilities in the system. And in those federally identified schools, that's where we need to invest. And I would offer that it's interesting to me just that we have essentially the same goal, which is these vulnerable populations, and we're not there in our budget in terms of what we really need to be doing, especially because we're on the hook for these schools' performance, so to speak. We have been designated as needing improvement, federally identified. And so that's just a real pain point for us, basically. And when our board met last week in a committee of the whole and really sliced and diced all of the items on that slide about our unmet needs, that was an area that we continue to believe is one of our our highest priorities, if not highest. And I will allow Ms. Clark to comment also on that.
I want to chime in on the planning factors, because that's something that I worked on. I think we did the work in 2021 before we had done the full commission with the Maryland Commission. But the reason why I want to chime in on that is because the total cost of planning factors, if we were to fully implement inclusive models across our entire school system, is close to $30 million. 33. So we are still funding education through segregation, essentially, in some of our classrooms, because we do not have the funding to be able to implement what we truly believe to be the appropriate ways to do this. And sadly, that you can see some of that resulted in the federally identified schools, because those schools do have such a high population of students with disabilities. And we have implemented tiny incremental change to improve that over time. And so I think it's important to highlight that piece.
And I also would say, just as a contextual piece, that our attempt to recalibrate our planning factors is to provide more equitable staffing, and it's because the state does not fund us in a per pupil model. So we are essentially having to adjust on our side in order to have an equitable model in our school system. And we will have to continue to make those adjustments over time as we can afford to, these incremental adjustments of a couple $1 million at a time, to make those changes until we wind up with a better funding model from the state. So
that was the foundation and the findings of the JLARC study comparative to other states. We're one of the few states that does this LCI component approach to funding only 20% of what the cost is, and then looking at a significantly different type of population, which is why in the study we were about, I think, Andy, $54 million underfunded based upon if they were to fund it per pupil based on the needs of the students. We know the state's not going to come with $54 million anytime soon for just Arlington, but that's a significant factor in terms of driving that. I also want to add, it's not just what we think and our best practices. The data has shown it in the schools and the spaces where we were able to have co-teaching done, where there was true effective co-teaching done with two teachers supporting the students' disabilities. We saw SOL scores, 10 to 15 points higher for those students, if not more. So that's something that we're also looking at tracking. It's not just getting more staff, it's making sure we provide the necessary training, which is why some of those dollars from Title II are important, so that we can make sure that it's truly effective co-teaching happening. We don't want to just provide a position and say, oh, here, go co-teach. There's necessary resources and tools that need to go along with that. And when it's done well, research has shown nationally, and our own data has told us as well, that is effective for those students.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. I think each of us well enough that that particular piece of the unfunded needs it would be high on our list of things that we're concerned about. There's some other items that we might have questions on, but certainly it's helpful to hear that specific piece. And mindful that both Miranda, you're ready to pounce with your comments, but I'd see Mr. Karantonis is ready to defer. It's up to you two.
Mr. Chair, maybe it's helpful to hear from our school board colleagues first on this.
Always a gentleman.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a follow-on to Ms. Coffey's comments, but I don't want to step on a question. Dacus, do you want to go first? Okay.
Stop deferring to each other.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jack.
Someone has to.
So I agree with the framing, Maureen, that both of our systems have lots of things that we'd like to do that we can't afford to do. And I guess I would add to that both of our systems per each set of slides have trends that have been coming over a number of years that are telling us that we can't afford to do all the things we'd like to do. And I think in this particular year, we've had some things that are not trends. They are highly unusual, and they have accelerated an existing trend. And I think it's on each of our respective bodies to manage through that, which is why we cannot implement our entire planning factor plan right away, as we would like to. It's why when we put compensation first, because we too would like to uphold our collective bargaining commitments, just like the county, and when we put that first, we're unable to add very many other things, even though we have many things that Dr. Duran would suggest to us are unmet needs and could really improve various things in our schools that lead to student outcomes. So we are very cognizant of all of that, and I think it's going to be an ongoing struggle well beyond just this year, particularly with some of our collective bargaining commitments. I think there would be space among our two boards as leaders of this community to come together and talk about and potentially prioritize and triage our respective views on our respective unmet needs. It is a little bit of a different conversation, though, when we hear things about per pupil cost in the Waby report and student outcomes, including for our students with disabilities, in commentary, and respective growth in budgets, and whether we can afford to close a shortfall that may be foisted upon us with our own reserves. So I just wanted to put it out there that maybe we need to have a conversation about what kind of conversation we're having between our two boards. Because right now it feels a lot more like the former, and we can come back and say some things in response and put up our own slides and talk about our perspective on the issues, but it's a different and less collaborative conversation to do it that way. And I think going forward, because we have such significant collective bargaining commitments and such a desire to roll out new initiatives to better serve our students, we would prefer to know which type of conversation we may be having going forward so that we can appropriately plan with whatever our allocation will be and however it will be shaped.
Thank you, Board Member Turner. There's a certain clarity to your comments that I appreciate. I think that the revenue sharing principles include, when I saw it, this office capacity was a immense problem. We're in a different space, and there are two references in the revenue sharing to the growth in students, and that's not where we are at this moment. So I do think we should have a conversation, and we made a commitment through, and I don't think that there's some, if you think of our public servants, our teachers, our custodians, our police officers, and our firefighters, to my knowledge, none who has that job would say that we should not fully value the other three areas that they should fund. And so I think that there was not this is not a statement. We've been dealing with vacancies and then holdovers at the fire department for some period of time. And so I think that this is an ongoing conversation, and we absolutely should engage in that conversation. It's a 10-year-old agreement with some assumptions that have shifted. And so I think we should have that conversation. I'll leave it to colleagues to add pieces to it. But I think for my part, grateful for the partnership and understand the desire fully to plan. And that's why I sort of tried to start my comments focusing on what we both sides have not planned for in terms of a fiscal 26 problem that we're seeking to deal with. I guess I also feel as though I personally think that I like to engage on the needs and to understand the needs on both sides as well as possible. But I'll leave it there and happy to try and pick up, if I haven't answered pieces of your question. I think it's a fair concern and critique, and happy to continue that part of the conversation. I think that individual sustained conversations and 2-by-2 conversations can have a whole lot of benefit. And I have at county board meetings and other said, my own engagement and communication could have been better in this one for sure.
Well, I will offer, Mr. Chair. Everybody's tags have gone up around the room, so we, Ms. Turner, as she often does, has sparked some thinking. I would offer simply that and respectfully, one-on-one and 2-by-2 conversations do not, in my mind, constitute a deliberate and substantive engagement between the two boards on the topic of the revenue sharing agreement. And I have heard county board members say that from the dais, that we have been talking about it, and I would argue for the sake of the public that we have not been, as two boards, talking about the revenue sharing agreement. And I can say that we dug up a copy. We had not looked at it. You all had not looked at it. And I think that we should be honest and open and say, there has not been, I've been on this board, I'm in my 4th year, there has not been a meeting of our two boards or a set of 2-by-2s on our two boards about the topic of the revenue share. So I just want to be clear about that, because I think that while we may have had individual conversations, and while each of our boards may have had conversations, and while we have some history that sometimes a tax increase has been allocated in different ways at the time of the increase, the proposed FY27 tax increase that the county has in their budget and that is not to be shared with APS was not discussed in any manner, nor has the bigger picture been discussed. So I just want to make that clear. I think Ms. Turner did make it clear, but I want to reemphasize it for the public, because I think that we should be clear on that point.
Sure, and I wasn't ruling out such discussions. I don't think now, my view is that now is not the time, and my view is also that inclusive conversations that are seeking to truly listen is what's the ultimate thing that's important. And 3 times in the past 7 years we've raised taxes with the explicit goal of making sure that we funded the school's needs. And so, I think that we should, in addition, have the further conversations, but I want to sort of, I don't know who you want, Madam Chair, to, maybe it's Dr. Duran.
I think we should return to Mr. Carantonis.
Mr. Carantonis, and then we'll go to Ms. Bryant.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. To the topic of this, so the discussion about the revenue sharing agreement is just the front for the discussion about understanding now, having a new reading on what are the major risks in our budget, what drives the volume of the budget, which in the case of APS was and continues to be payroll, basically. And so we will be discussing how you optimize that. Last year we had a huge discussion, if I remember correctly, about optimization of teacher student ratios. There was a lot of investment in how this over time will, optimize the number of FTEs needed and match, enrollment with teachers, et cetera, et cetera. On our side, we have a little bit more complex. I mean, we share the predominance of payroll and the predominance of our county employees' compensation. But there are other driving factors. In the recent years, we had transportation questions that were not answered, still not completely answered, by the way, and still not gone away. And we have also other things that are critical for going forward. For example, today we can tell you, or at least I can tell you, that funding, continuing our housing programs, absorbing the increasing cost in core social services. Housing programs is one of them, is not guaranteed. It's really asking us to ask the taxpayers of their direct acquiescence now. What happened this year, and that I believe triggers this discussions, that this is the first year where what the little fiscal buffer that we had with one-time funding from the previous year, better performing previous year, is now zero. Last year it was already very, very, very narrow, 8 million if I remember correctly, and now it's 0 million. And so any change in our budgets will have to find will find immediately its expression in a tax rate variation, increase, decrease, etc. So this basically took away our ability to manage as we go and find out, a little bit later and compensate with other sources, which, good managers always do, but now we don't have this discretionary space anymore. At the same time, the significant pressures on, as I see in your slides, you said a lot about planning factors. You talked about English, English as a second language speakers, etc. You are actually actively trying to attend to that by shuffling funds first, and then you see that you're still at a gap. Previous to any revenue sharing discussion, we have to really digest what these risks and what these growing demands look like. Because the primary function of the revenue sharing agreement is to give you planning, some sort of planning certainty, right? How your budget will relate to that. So for example, I found it on our side growingly difficult to carry on the sharing when we talk about core housing funding. By the way, housing funding helps always APS. It helps also the classes of students and households that you want to help in the first place, the equity-sensitive things. Transportation funding helps also APS, should help more. Core social services helps also APS. So after that, I see a lot more space. So I agree with the chair. I mean, we have to begin to dive into a continuous dialogue in the 2x2 space, and we need to share about what we see evolving in the next few years, because there are significant challenges for all of us. Arlington is still, as a jurisdiction, not a very high tax jurisdiction. Some of them, you compare to us, have significantly higher tax rates. So I do believe that there's possibly some incremental space there, but we need to be very aligned and synchronized in approaching that out of the common understanding of what actually the challenge is beyond that budget. One question on the 4.8. So these 4.8 may miss this year, fiscal year 26, right? So that means this is part of the revenue that you wouldn't. Is there additional revenue that is not coming in for some reason? Probably only the 4.8, right?
We're not aware of any additional significant shortfalls in other revenue streams.
So that's the risk.
Yes.
So altogether, together with fiscal year 27, worst case would be 4.8 plus the 3.6. So about 8 point something.
Well, plus the federal government in fiscal 27 potentially
and
could be up to 3.
hopefully federal government won't be so bad as the minus.
Could be up to 3 though.
Yeah. And plus the state budget could be kicking in, the 2.5, that additional.
Correct.
That would be next year.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're 27, yeah.
Yes, that would be next year.
Correct.
Yeah, open. I thought I saw Ms. Bryant and Mr. Spain, and I don't know who's next. Mr. Spain.
Okay. Thank you for. Can we move? They're not like the county board mics.
Okay.
Can we go to slide 25 real quick? I just want to ask a question here or two. So I just need to kind of take this in. This slide, in comparison from other jurisdictions, showcases to me that we are, in fact, one, if not the highest locale that is spending per pupil. Is that correct?
Yes, we are the highest per pupil. And
right. But however, this also showcases that we're not the fastest growing system.
We're not fastly growing our cost per pupil over the last 5 years. We've been trying to maintain it as best we can. It's mostly been aligned, actually, since the last 5 years of the last 5 budgets I've done. All those 5 years increases have been directly correlated to the increase in compensation for our teachers and our staff.
So we're spending significant money per pupil. So my question is, and I think you kind of talked to this a little bit, Dr. Duran, do we feel with this level of investment per pupil, are we hitting the right, regionally right, in lower scale comparison to others, and that can be contributed to increase of people coming into those areas, so they're trying to play catch up, we know all that. Our outcomes at the end of the day, for what the bang for the buck, are you thinking we meet the marker at the end of the day, or in the matching of this investment that we're putting in?
To unpack that question, yes and no, because right now we do not see that for our students with disabilities or English learners. I also want to be clear, what's on, which slide is it? The next slide? This slide here, which is very critical, in comparison to some of our other surrounding jurisdictions, our cost per pupil gets elevated because of some of the specialty programs, which I think are very important programs for our community, which many surrounding school systems do not have in their per pupil average because they are under the county or the locality's costs, and they're not under the school system's costs. So I think for that piece, that's a very, very defining moment where we think about adult education in particular, GED, teen parenting. A lot of those programs in other localities aren't counted for in their per pupil, and I'm not speaking negatively about those programs, but how they're calculated. So with that in mind, I do think, again, our pure pupil factor needs to be considered with our planning factors, which is not aligned to what we're meeting. Our federally identified schools, all 10 of them are for one reason, but all the other subgroups and the overall reasons they did meet. So we were not identified as some of our surrounding jurisdictions that were up on that previous slide here. Many of them had other federal identified schools for a lot of other factors, or even the whole school. So we do have some areas of success when we're looking at the outcomes that we're meeting, but for our students with disabilities, and all 10 of those, no. And for our 2 or 3 of them for English learners, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Spain, I would also quickly add, I don't think our numbers are very far off in terms of how well we're serving special education students. Loudon seems to have text around this number because it has historically been a point of criticism of the school system, but there are reasons why the number is what it is. Ms. Bryant has requested the timer.
I'm going to try to be brief, but there's a couple of things. So, Mr. Schwartz, thank you for saying that the revenue share is the elephant in the room. So I want to bring it into the room so that we can kind of get past it to move forward. I heard about the vacancies and the concern and the burden of having vacancies with the police and fire. I want to make sure that we are all in alignment, that we equally share the burden, especially as it comes to our special education vacancies, serving some of our most vulnerable learners. Specifically, I've had 2 separate individuals reach out while we've been in this meeting about one youth, one young adult, non-speaking individuals that are experiencing a situation in our community at this moment. So we share that burden. I want to thank you all for your effort, especially as we are ensuring social services. I know there's a lot of collaboration going on, so much so I think Ms. Michelle had mentioned the child and youth well-being. It is this afternoon for anybody that wants to attend, 4:30 to 6 will be another work session. But I do want to take a moment to speak to process, right? Because process really shapes trust. And I thank my colleagues for bringing it into the room. The timing and manner in which we learned that we wouldn't share the tax increase is concerning to me. As the newest school board member, I asked quite a few questions like, was this already done beforehand? Maybe I'm just getting myself up to speed. And overall, we heard it, it wasn't. Not so much as the financial impact, but to me it signals a concern of collaboration between two governing boards, specifically to budget. And at my core, speaking as one board member, this is our moral obligation. It's our shared moral obligation to the community. And so I have one quick thing to consider and two specific questions. I think we collectively agree that fiscal responsibility doesn't stop at the numbers. It goes to planning, communicating, and being good stewards of dollars. And so going forward, given that I'm anticipating we all know that we're going to be in a fluid economic environment, I think it would behoove us to go ahead and move forward with planning a fully fledged timeline to discuss the budget. This is futuristic thinking. It's not just for our board, but in years to come, even when that's gone. And then another question that I have, a specific question, because I know that you've all done your homework. Given the absence of the revenue share, what specific reductions would you all as a county board propose to APS, and how do they align with our shared responsibility to meet the needs of the community?
I think that one's a hard one for us to answer because we give you money and you decide, like it's your obligation to decide where to put it. I think each of us as parents, as community members might have great ideas, just like the other 240,000 people in the community. But I don't think that's our role, and we try hard not to overstep that line because that's up to you all to share.
No, I know. I just wanted to see what, I thought that everybody probably have an idea of where that would land. Just curious.
Well, I also thought you mentioned two specific questions, so I was wondering if we were going to get the other one first. But I think Ms. Cunningham has kind of shared my broad thinking. Oh, sorry. I think it's on, but so you mentioned two specific questions, and so I was wondering if I was going to get them both. But I think Ms. Cunningham has provided a big picture context, and I think that there's more to share, certainly, but maybe, at least for my part, the identified schools have a particularly compelling case for me. And I would note that, part of at least my own vote, I'll just speak for myself, on the additional half-cent was mindful of the needs that schools might have, just as I have tried to indicate concretely that the fiscal 26 softness, there may be one-time money that I at least would be significantly open to helping to close, subject to the slide or the piece of the budget book that Mr. Hawkins is going to eventually share. So,
thank you. The other question was, what does a fully fledged timeline look like? What do you imagine that being? As we heard, the 2x2s that haven't been happening in years prior, and going forward, knowing that we're in this unstable economic environment, what does that look like going forward for budget conversation?
I don't want to speak. Colleagues certainly jump in. I'll just say, for my part, I really appreciate the slide that has 56K for the specialty programs. Last year, Dr. Duran had a great specific answer that there are buckets of things that lead to the WABI slightly being larger. And we shouldn't, in my opinion, we are not experts. We should not own the adult education pieces from a running them standpoint. I am, however, open to learning where they should be budget shifted to our side on a case-by-case basis. But that's the challenge for me, is that I would like to I'd like to get to that level of detail, and I think it's both. I'm not precluding a conversation on a joint meeting in addition, but I feel like if I haven't done a ton of the work leading up to the meeting, I feel sometimes that there can be productivity in me doing that work on all of us doing that work on the details of the specifics that lead to those things before the meeting to be most productive. And so I think that's before us. What I'm a little reluctant. I like the concept of future-facing conversations more than I like. 2 or 3 years ago, we committed to spending all summer together, and we did not, to be honest. And so I'd rather do the dang work than say we're going to do the dang work before actually not doing all the dang work. And dang is a technical term.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, can I lean it? Can I add a comment to that?
Oh, sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. No, I just, the chair had mentioned if the colleagues want to lean in, I think I'm going to go with what Board Member Cunningham and our chair so eloquently said. I came to the space today, thinking about the role, our respective roles as school board and county board. We have clearly defined lines, both in the fiduciary responsibilities, and I think with that, we need to stay straight right there. Full stop. Conversations in the future that may happen despite what has happened in the past, I think that's something we can talk about outside of the scope of this particular meeting today, and anything's possible, but I just don't want to start mixing apples and oranges and making commitments at this stage of the game on a level of meetings that should occur with these two governing bodies, because I think it's maybe worthy of conversation, but not at a point where I want to be well studied and prepared about what are the outcomes we're trying to seek in a conversation coming together. Is it just revenue sharing, or is it more to it? Is it, talking about services that are rendered between school board and county board and how we can find ways to be more effective? I think it's larger than just an isolated conversation. So just wanted to share my thoughts to this for the moment. Thank you, both chairs.
So I think is it Mr. Karantonis and then Ms. Cunningham? I believe that was first, but I'm not sure.
Ms. Cunningham, I think.
Go ahead, Ms. Cunningham. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I've been on the board 2.5 years, and we did say 2.5 years ago, hair on fire, we need to spend the summer together. And while we didn't spend every day of August, in part because we spent it doing something else that year, we did have a number of conversations, and we had sort of a structure. And part of that was because our board was so new, and you guys had the one-time funding challenge that we were a little bit farther out of the pit from. So I thought that worked really well. I mean, the work you guys did over the last 2 years is really notable, and I am really, really grateful for it and aware that had you not gotten through that work and had we not gone through that challenging time together, that we would really be up a creek right now, So I'm just so grateful for that. I will pledge as one board member, absolutely happy to be part of whether it's committee of the whole, whether it's 2x2s. I think the more often we talk, I know our executives do talk pretty regularly. The revenues in particular in a time of fluctuation are particularly challenging to project. So, as we get new information each month, it's important. And I think those conversations are still happening between the two executives, but then to make sure it's flowing down to each board and that we're digesting it together, I think is really, really important. So take that point. And then I have a bunch of smaller questions, but I suspect Mr. Karantonis may be on the same topic.
Partially, but I really wanted to come back to meat and potatoes, but nevertheless,
if we can try to also get in Dr. Duran and Ms. Turner. So
right.
I would just ask, because you've corrected me, Ms. Cunningham, that the spirit of what you said is right. We spent more than a little time together all summer. I'm just saying, I want to be, and so. That's right. We should spend more time. There was never. It's public matter that we committed to $10 million in ongoing for police and fire. We never hid that, and the implications of that. And I don't think that we tried. There was no effort to try not to share information. And you're in a catch-22 on if we had asked gymnastics parents, should we cut your program before he proposed it, they would have brought it to Arl now and tried to change the structure of his proposal. That is not to say that there wasn't an effort. There's a failure, and I'll own it, to communicate early enough and often enough. But I would say also that it is a difficult set of things, and Ms. Cunningham, I think, is also correct, that you guys did a ton of hard things. And so we're grateful for it. But I think it's over to your side, Dr. Duran and Ms. Turner.
Just briefly, thank you, Susan, for those comments, and Matt for yours as well. And just to make a couple of brief observations and lightly push back, the gymnastics parents don't have an elected body to represent their interests in the county. And I think one of the things we should maybe all give some thought to is whether we need to have ongoing conversations or not. I'm hearing, some mixed views on that. And yet I'm also still hearing yes, there are lanes, but that's too much, without a real sense of an answer to Ms. Bryant's question or a different way to approach it. So I just think for future discussion purposes, how we can approach it.
All of us try to have monthly conversations. You're asking for more structured.
I'm not necessarily, but I think it is hard for us to understand how to respond to, on the one hand, this is too much, you're doing some things that may be receiving quiet disapproval, and also we can't talk it through so that we know how to plan.
I'm certainly open to having the conversation about talking it through. Of course, we did not know to your question, we didn't have core unfunded needs at the time, as we were considering setting this up, so it's hard to specify. And I just think that, there's plenty more to do, but I don't know. I think it was probably to Dr. Duran, sorry.
And that's a good segue what you just said. As we move forward through every conversation, I think what's very important is also not just what the share is, that's for you all to discuss, but the process and the communication. Mr. Schwartz knows a long time ago when I came here, I committed to him that I would not do what my colleagues do, which is to put out all of these political issues and get people riled up and go back and forth. We've worked collaboratively together on the budget. But in that same vein, with that in mind, whatever the transfer is, he's very clear all the time what the transfer is going to be well enough in advance that I could make the presentation accordingly. But what I've not done is to then what you just described, to share all those unmet needs or what those needs were prior to that, which is what happens in other localities where my colleagues, superintendents, they will present all the thing, put it all out there with a huge dollar amount that they're not going to get. And then there's some collaboration that goes back down because they don't have a share. So my point, though, is then we hear from our community, our teachers, our parents, you're not actually proposing to the county board what your needs are. You're just working within the county transfer. You're not doing what... So what I'm asking here is, as we move forward through these collaborations and through this process, maybe it's a different timing of when I propose my budget versus when you propose yours, or maybe it's a different timing of how I put my needs out there too. Maybe we have a meeting like this with what the needs are before we put my proposal, if we're not going to stick to the share or if we're going to change that. Whatever that may be, I think that Ms. Coffey said it very well at the beginning. We're both sharing the same issues. We have the same needs. But how that's being presented and or perceived and or received by our community is not that way. And that's comments and emails I've gotten and feedback that I've gotten. And my charge and goal is always going to be and wants to be collaborative and to work together with all of you on that. And so, Mr. Schwartz, I remember 5 or 6 budgets ago, I said, this is what I plan to do always, and I have committed and I've done that. And I have always proposed a budget that was within the transfer and then separately what some of those needs were. But if there's going to be a shift in how we need to address those needs, which are needs that we both have that we're not going to be able to fund, is there a way we could do it more transparently, more publicly, and maybe changing the timeline of how we do things in the process? The procedure that's set up here is not the procedure that has to happen in code or by law in terms of how this goes. So let's unpack that and see, is there a better way for us from a transparent public perspective to do that so that we can be, I plan to be as collaborative as possible in terms of working with the realities that you face, that we face. We're not going to, in the next 10 years even, who knows when, going to be able to meet all of those needs. But I do feel some sense of obligation, and also it is in the code that the superintendent does present a needs-based budget. So I want to find a way that I'm doing that collaboratively, but also in a way that our public sees that I'm actually advocating for those things. That makes sense.
Well, I would just very quickly add that in the planning process, if we know that the county transfer is not going to be able to comprise 80% of our budget, we have no other recourse except to cut things because we have no way to raise revenue. So in that sense, the planning piece, we see that the past 2 years, we've not had 80% of the revenue come from the county. So we need to factor that in to our thinking, because if that's going to continue, we have to figure out, how to make that work. So.
Sure, I think it was Mr. Carantonis and Ms. Coffey, or
if Ms. Coffey wants to say something specific on that.
Yeah.
I have also a couple of thoughts.
Mostly with respect to this isn't necessarily the process we have to commit to. I feel like I text Ms. Zecker-Sutton all the time that it can always be worse, in fact. And sometimes when you look at things happening in our region between local governments and their school elected leadership, it is not always better. And so I do think that it is worth acknowledging that the pains that we're experiencing here and the struggles, it's not like everyone's got it all figured out. And I don't know that there is a perfect way. There may be a better way. And I think we should be open to talking about that and having those conversations. But I also know that I don't think any of our neighbors, even though they are being presented, well, here's the full needs of our school system, I don't think any of them are funding the requests of their school boards. And so I don't know. I just think that's like an interesting thing to think about. It's true that we do it a little bit differently. It's also true that there is a lot of tension and contentiousness between our elected colleagues in other jurisdictions, and I don't want that to happen here. I think it's good that we all work together and we collaborate and we have these conversations and we share services and we share all kinds of stuff, and so I just
Sure.
Drop that little flag. It can always be worse.
It can be worse, but it can be better.
As a matter of fact, it has been worse. I mean, last year, you could walk across the former run to Alexandria and see how this went when the school system was asking for $57 million and the council approved 20, right? So, and couldn't approve more, actually. But this was not a situation we wanted to be, and we achieved not to be in this situation at all the contrary, actually. So one thing that is really driving behind, and I tried to signal this before, the frame of our revenues is actually shrinking. It's not increasing. Despite inflation, we have a practically stagnant budget, which means that is going down. The problem with inflation is that at the same time it fuels the most difficult to manage factor here, which is compensation, because people need to be paid properly to be able to make it in this economy, right?
Mr. Carantonis, I think we have 4 minutes remaining. So,
oh, really?
If there's a question.
I thought, that's already 4 p.m.
Sure.
And,
so that's always short.
And
anyway,
I did have
we talk very often about money when we talk with each other. I mean, I think this is appropriate and it's a good thing. Continuing to institutionalize that and have structured conversations and understanding where the pressure points are is important. I wanted to ask us something else, which is for me always important. There are certain places where we collaborate organically, like, for example, everything that has to do with digital infrastructure, everything that has to do with some facilities, etc. Is there room for improvement there, or is there any desire to do things differently, coming from your side?
I think that yes and no.
Everything's perfect, but we could still do better.
Very succinct.
I think we are doing quite well in the areas where we have shared facilities, shared purposes, things that we are, mindful of. I think in terms of what we're doing, what the county is doing, and vice versa. I think there are always ways that we can revisit things over time. And I think the work that we're doing this year to look at early childhood, child care, I think that's really valuable. I think doing those things in collaboration is really valuable. So, and I recently put an agenda item into the mind of the chair of JFAC to look at something that is a collaborative area and a little bit of a pain point. So I think we can always be looking at things together, and that's going to be to our benefit. Does anything specific come to mind right now? No.
I don't think so. Ms. Cunningham, sorry. Just be mindful of time.
Yep.
I thought it was vestige, right?
Yeah, that was vestige. I think I'd just take us back to where we started in the beginning with Ms. Coffey's comment that, this is, I don't know, maybe our 100th hour of budget work sessions at this point. And in each and every one that intersects with the state, which is everyone, the message is, hey, we're really hurting over here in Arlington with unemployment, with office space declining, with just activity, and holy heck with hotels and tourism. And Richmond is having a hard time adapting to us not being the kitty. And, we usually send every dollar we send, we get 30 cents back, which is fine when it's not raining. But we need to figure out how to shift that. And I think the composite score index? The local composite index, if I understand, is calculated like 5 years back, right? So it's like 2022 or something. So it's deferred anyway in terms of catching up. It's great if you're always climbing, or but if you're doing this, you're going to get nonsense. And I think that's a challenge. And like with our community, to make sure they're understanding the value and the values that they're getting and that we're jointly delivering. I think we need to communicate way better and way more in real time about what's shifting, and therefore how do we adapt. And we need Richmond to come with us. It is a very, very hard communication, but the investment that they make will return sevenfold. And I think that on the collective bargaining side, when you do the math for fire and police and the overtime that we're paying them to be really tired at work, doing really critical jobs, if we can get hold of that this year, then it will pay back, right? And then there'll be more to share with other things. So I think communications and how we do that together, I think each year I've asked you, Dr. Duran, like how, what are the talking points? How do we talk about how, not just that our schools are amazing, because they are, but like, here's where we invest. And therefore our disabled 5-year-old is a really, really successful 8-year-old. And therefore when they come back to us at 24 or whatever to our programs, they need a lighter touch. And so it's just the right thing, and it's the right value. So I think we really need to invest in that communication. And I would maybe just leave it then with Mr. Schwartz. Like, one of the challenges in public budgeting is, the revenues are coming in really chunky ways. So maybe just orienting us to, like, we can start in August, but we don't know how bad the revenues are, how good they are, until we have each of those kind of quarterly closeouts. Can you just, for all of us, and again, we're all learning, the key elements where you give the superintendent and give us an update on budgets? It's like every 2 months, it feels like, every 3 months.
Well, I will say Dr. Duran asks every week. I just want to be clear about that.
Good. That's the right answer.
He does.
That's the right answer.
That's an accurate
I
statement.
do too.
So usually when we're and I'm going to start like around October, November, we'll give an estimate of what where we think our main source of revenues are going to be real estate, but those are not really nailed down until we get to the very beginning of January. And so that is the main source. We propose a budget in February without knowing our second source is personal property, but B-poll, which is really big. We still don't actually know what it is we have in pocket yet, because they're still coming in. So it is, and then the other source, of course, is the state. We all suffer that. So, and I know you were all laughing a little bit, but Francisco asking me that question every week is actually a good thing, because these strange events happen every week. But there is a rhythm. As far as getting a better sense of what's going on, I'll say the only time where we don't have additional information is usually over the summer. There's not a lot going on there.
Great, thank you. And then just to wrap, like I think Dr. Duran, you always talk about meeting each child, knowing each child by name, by need, by strength. And I think that need, the child by need and the program by need, is really, really someplace for us to focus this year. And it sounds to me, from all the careful work you're doing on planning factors and outcomes and the state identified schools, that it is our special needs population in particular, and perhaps ELL as well, that really need that investment. And so in a time where the pot is not expanding, what do some of the other kids, some of the other programs not need quite as much? And can we balance that or try that and see what we can do? So I think that's one question. You see it on our side, we're not putting any, the proposal is to not buy any digital library materials this year. It's to close a library, to close a beloved program, to get rid of a fire and rescue truck so it'll take a little longer when you're stuck under a car. Those are big deals. Those are really big deals. But the trade-off we've been making is, but we need to have people on duty. So, thank you.
So, the intellectual strength and synthesizing all that, Ms. Cunningham, was awesome. And with due respect to Ms. Bryant, I think Ms. Turner fully brought the elephant in the room, and you just helped make sure the elephant was right there in the center. I guess, and I knew this was going to occur, and it should. Process, if you're not in the conversation communicating, it's a problem. And let's do a sprint on the money that's there for this budget too, to see what we can do, right? In addition to the process, because we're not closed. We haven't made, the half cent from my part was room for schools, and then looking at 26. I'm open there. That's not an ideal world, but in addition to fixing the process after the budget, we've got until April 22nd on our side to really work the details of this to see what's possible. And I think you've heard hints from each of us as to where we could try to be helpful. And I hope that's okay to name, in addition to the clear elephant sitting right there.
Thank you, Chair DeFronti. I'll take the liberty of having the final word as the host today. Really, really appreciate the very open, direct, honest conversation with all of you. That was what I had hoped coming in, is that we could do that and do so in a productive manner where we can see where I keep using the term pain points, but where the pain points are, both in our respective budgets and also in terms of just how we are looking at all of this landscape that we're in and making sense of it. So hopefully we've done justice to some of that today. Very much appreciate you coming over. My script requires me to say that the school board will convene in a closed meeting on the selection of the Honored Citizens Award at 4:15 p.m. So we are reconvening at 4:15, and thank you all for coming on over today.